let's go back to before we get to the profile. How about register? So in register, we like to be able to create a new user, right? But there are two things here in the register. One is I want to make sure that this user doesn't exist yet, right? And if it does exist, we're going to create them. Okay. So let's focus first on checking to see if the user exists. So for instance, if Bob already exists, and I try to register as Bob, it should stop me from that, right? The user is already exists. Now the way this works right now is that in the register controller, it's using user service find user by username. Yes, and currently that is implemented in the client service right here. All right, so let's remove this, that, and that, and let's hear the controller. Let's put it here. It's using currently find user by username in the client right here. There it is, right? And we want to move this to the client, to the server side, right? So let's move it over to the server. We want to do something like return. Well, we want the URL. The URL will be something like var URL starts with API. The entity object that we are asking information about is user. Okay, and then followed by the query username equal and then username. That's the only parameter we're asking. Is there a user whose username is that username? Okay, and we're going to go out to the generate an HTTP request. It's a get. It's a read. Right. We're retrieving data from the server, so we use a get. We pass the URL, and then we return it to the controller. Yes, right? And we don't want this code. Now, if we run this and refresh this now, and we try Bob, and Bob, okay, register. Notice that it's going out to the find user by username and password. Right? Is that what we meant? Perhaps not. Right? Notice that we have the username. We were able to retrieve the username. We're able to retrieve not the password. The password is undefined in this case, right? But we're trying to register, right? We want to first check to see if the username exists or not. Yes, right? So we really care about the username. We don't really care about the password. So this find user by username and password is a little bit over. It's a little over the top, right? We want one that only checks for the username, but not necessarily both. Yes, okay. But how do we get here? Why do we are hitting find user by username and password when that was supposed to happen only if we're doing this one, right? Find username by username and password, not when we're trying to find user by ID. Notice that there are distinct URLs. See that? Okay, one is using API user question mark username, whereas this one is using API user question mark username and password. See that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the server can't distinguish between these types of URLs, right? The query string is not used to discern in the URLs. Make sense? Right? So on the server side, we're kind of stuck, right? What do? We want to handle two different things. So what we're going to need to do is we need to make our function a little bit smarter, right? And behave one way if it has username, and behave another way if it has both. Make sense? So we're gonna kind of like overload this function. Yes. So we're not gonna find it by username and password or just by username. So I'm gonna give it a more generic name. I'm gonna call it find user. Okay. And based on whether I have both or just one, I will do one way or another. Okay, so this is going to be inside of an if statement. If I have both username and I have password, right? If I have both, then yes, I will do this for loop. Okay. Else, if I only have username, then I'll do something else. Okay. And what I do with it, if I have just a username, is the code that we commented out here. So we're going to remove it from here, from the client, and we're going to move it over to the server side, right, without the comments. Right? This is going to iterate over the users, right? If the username matches the username, I'm going to send back the user, sub-user. Well, actually, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Otherwise, and we're going to return, right? And here. Okay. All right. So let's refresh, see if this works. Let's refresh. Let's go back here. Clear this out. We'll try Alice. Oops. What happened? Let's refresh. Actually, let's put some breakpoints here to see where it actually goes. So Alice. Register goes back to the server. If we hover over the username, there it is, Alice. We never passed the password, so it's undefined. So it's not going to go into the first if statement. Instead, where is my debug? Okay, where's my debugger? Oh, here it is. So continue. Okay, so it goes into the second if statement. So it's going to look for the user by just the username. We say okay, continue, and it comes back with the user already exists. Make sense? Everybody good? All right. What about actually generating the user? So if the user does not exist, on the client side, we like to check to see this user is 0, right? Meaning if the user is not user, meaning is 0, false, or falsy, then we want to register the user. Otherwise, we want to say the user already exists. So we know this part works already, right? Actually, we don't, right? Because we haven't tested it correctly. This is a promise, right? This is a promise, right? So we need to refactor this. This is going to be a promise, and this is going to be promise dot then function. This is going to be a response. And we're going to say, we're going to move the logic into the promise. And this is going to be var underscore user. It's going to be response dot data. Okay, let's try this out. Let's refresh and go to our register controller so that we can follow along where the logic takes us. Okay, so here's going to be our promise. There it is, and we're going to put our logic right there, our breakpoint right there, and let's try it again. Alice, or just Bob. Register. There it is, our promise. Goes back to the server, continues. Eventually, it's going to hit this here, hopefully. It finds Bob. Now it goes back to the client. And our user is, okay, we have a user. Yes, we have a user, so it's not user. Right, so it's going to go into our model error and give us an error here. There is user already exists. Very good. So that works. What about when there is a user? So let's try, or when I try login as Dan, or register as Dan, and Dan. Register is not going to find it. Right, it's going to return a 0. Right, it's going to return a 0. There it is. So on the client side, data is 0. Let's see. So I guess 0 is not a user. So I think we need to be a little bit more explicit on this logic. So if it's not, let's see, if it's not 0, maybe? Would that work? If underscore user is not 0, well, no. No, wait. Sorry, if it is 0, right? If it is 0, then the user doesn't exist, yes? And so we want to register that user, correct? Right, okay. All right, so let's try that. Let's refresh again. So we'll do po, and po. Register. That user doesn't exist. It goes back here. Well, hopefully we know that's going to return a 0 here. Okay, it's going to find 0. There it is. So it's going to come back. Here is going to be 0. There it is. So if it is 0, it's going to come in here, and it's going to want to register the user. Okay? You're going to want to register the user. Say OK. So it registered the user, but let's see, undefined. Okay, it wants to add it to the local array of users when it registers the users. Yes, right? But we're moving away from the array, right? We don't want to use the array anymore, right? So let's work on that. Let's work on that next.